This is the 400th anniversary of the first settlement of Africans in the United States. My family hails from the state of Virginia, and I know tonight we're going to talk about some of the developments in Virginia. Derrick Johnson was appointed first as the interim chair of the NAACP, and later he was elected by the board to serve as the president and CEO of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He is a long-standing member of the organization. Derrick has also served as the president of the NAACP in the great state of Mississippi. He's a proud graduate of Tougaloo College in Jackson, and then he continued his education in Houston, where he received his law degree from Southern Texas College of Law. He has also been a fellow at the Congressional Black Caucus Institute. He's also served as a lecturer at Harvard University Law School, working with Lonnie Guinier. He's also been involved at the he's also received training at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the George Washington University School of Political Management. I don't know about many of you, but I joined the NAACP at the age of 10. So I've been a member for 48 years. Back then it was $10. I'm talking to the students. It was $10. I believe the dues today, Derrick, is it $25? I'm a lifetime member. Every year, is it $15? $15, $30? You can afford it. And the good news is that you should be able to pay your dues before you need to call the NAACP. So the NAACP has been a vital organization. For over 110 years, this organization has helped to advance the cause of equality under the law and equal justice under the law, as well as an organization that has stood on the front line against lynching and promoting equal education and promoting civil rights, voting rights, and criminal justice reform. I'm proud of Derrick's leadership. Under his leadership, I'm getting more mail-ins, action alerts, requests for more money, as well as I am also being called upon to be an activist to contact my member of Congress. I'm proud of his leadership as well as the leadership of the board. And I know tonight we're going to have a very robust conversation on some of the big ticket items that we're all hearing about in American politics. Everything from the State of the Union to the rebuttal provided by the great Stacey Abrams of the state of Georgia. We're also going to talk about William Barr and his nomination. We're going to talk about the situation in Virginia. And of course, we would like to also take a deep dive into some of the statements that President Trump made, as well as his judicial nominees. So I thought this year, to kick off the King Lecture Series, it was important to bring someone who is a seasoned fighter and champion for justice and equality, and also a young man who is no stranger to taking on tough issues and leading the nation's largest and I believe the most effective grassroots civil rights organization today in American history. So Derrick, I want to thank you on behalf of Howard University for coming today during Black History Month, and I also want to welcome you to this historic campus. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Derrick Johnson, thank you. How you doing?
I'm good.
Thank you. Derrick, I want to just start off right now and ask you your reaction to President Trump's State of the Union, his message. He called for unity. He called for us to become a great country. He also threatened members of Congress not to investigate him. What is your reaction to the State of the Union?
You know, it's unfortunate that he was a distraction from Stacey Abrams' State of the Union. I think she did a great job. She was clear, she was focused. You know, it's one of those realities for African Americans that we must accept the fact that the current president has been one of the best galvanizing forces to turn out the black folks. It's that wake-up call that I think we needed. Because if you can remember 2008, we celebrated what we thought was impossible. And then the commentators began to talk about a post-racial society. And here we are some 10 years later, 11 years later, and recognizing that the occupant of the White House gives us a daily reminder why we as a people must stick together and stay together. Because what the president has done is opened up the eyes of so many people that this nation still have not dealt with race. And his appeal to the lowest common denominator allow us as a community to really focus on what's important and not think that we can march and demonstrate and everything is going to be okay. We have to get to the polls and vote.
The president said that we can choose greatness. But he said by choosing greatness, we had to commit ourselves to his ideals, his values. How would you choose greatness for America in the 21st century? What would it look like?
Greatness for America is when we ensure that we care for our elderly, that we prepare our young people so they can have a bright future, that we protect the rights of the disadvantaged, however we place the label of disadvantage around individuals. That's what makes a healthy society. That is what will make us great. And when we can lean into all of our best, despite our gender, orientation, or ethnic background, to ensure that people have equal access, equal opportunity, that's when we'll be a great nation.
President Johnson, you also mentioned that the president forgot something. He forgot to talk about some issues. If you were advising the president prior to his speech and even now, what issues would you ask him or request that he put in his next State of the Union?
Well, if he was reasonable minded, I would say, in order for us to be a prosperous nation, we need to make a policy priority to strengthen free public education. Because in the global economy, if we're not training the next workforce, we will be left behind. Secondly, the issue of health care is something that's serious. It's a bread and butter issue. And as young people, you may not understand the significance, but there are many individuals who simply are using a substantial part of their household income on health care. And then overarching to all of that, we must be a nation that is of one nation and not allow individuals and radio hosts to divide us and use messages of hate.
Will this country remain divided until we address the issue of race?
There's no other way to move forward as the United States until we address race.
Do you think the president addressed race by mentioning his pardon of Alice Johnson and the suspension of the sentence for, I believe it was Mr. Charles, the individual who benefited from the First Step Act?
Racism as we know it, xenophobia as we know it today, is germinating from the White House. Individual acts don't erase the fact that we have a current political landscape devoid of any civility. And that rests right at the footsteps of the White House.
You've also, and I want to get to Stacey Abrams in a minute because I agree with you. I thought her remarks were phenomenal. But you've also called upon the governor and now the Attorney General of the state of Virginia to step down. Can you explain to our audience why you took such a bold stance?
If you understand not only the history of black folks in this country, but the creation of the NAACP, it had a lot to do with the images of how we were being depicted. During the lifetime of Frederick Douglass, he was the most photographed individual in the country. It was very intentional because he had an appreciation for art. But it was also very intentional because he would see the characters in the cartoons in the newspaper. Before there was Twitter, there was the cartoon section of the paper. And it was the cartoon section of the paper because the majority of this nation, black or white, couldn't read or write. And so he recognized that when they would depict African Americans, it was in a very negative way. NAACP, the second big issue we took on after anti-lynching legislation was to push back around a movie that was released in 1916, The Birth of a Nation. And in that movie, you had people in blackface. And anytime you would see, moving forward, images of us from the majority society, it was in blackface or it was some kind of buffoonery. The images of the Klan was an image of domestic terrorism, followed by a burning cross, followed by a Confederate symbol, followed by characters of who they thought we were, whether it was in cartoons with the watermelons or individuals with blackface. All of those things are very negative. And if we can't stand for a value proposition that address our image, and those who take our image and make a mockery out of it, whether it was 35 years ago or 30 years ago, we must stand for that. This supersedes partisanship. Don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat. It's not acceptable.
So what should happen next in Virginia, since Virginia officials seem to be at an impasse?
First of all, the governor needs to step down. For an individual to take accountability for his action on Friday night and give that bizarre press conference on Saturday morning, that shows that he truly is clueless in concerning the impact of his actions. And what he's doing now is spinning his wheels trying to figure out how to save his political career. But saving his political career, for me, is stepping back. Over the last 5 days, Virginia's been like whiplash. What's going to happen next?
Right.
But I hope whatever happens, it will serve the best interest not only of the Virginian, but African Americans in Virginia, because there's some healing that needs to take place.
So in the case of the Attorney General, Mr. Herron, he put out a statement calling for Governor Northam to step down, and then 2 days later, we learned that he appeared in a similar type of photo in his college yearbook. What message should we send to politicians now about their yearbook and more importantly, about the image of blackface? Should we ask every politician to go back and look into their yearbook or any other book to see if there's pictures that might force them to come to the table and address this issue?
That plus, it should be a lesson to all of us. The yearbook of 1980s is our social media today. So what I'm telling my sons and my daughters, be careful what you post on your social media, because it will follow you. It may be a joke today, but 10 years from now, 15 years from now, it may not look so funny when others look at it. So be careful what images you put out there.
There's another issue that I just read about Reverend William Barber, and I know you haven't had a chance to read his article that's appearing in the Washington Post tomorrow, but he said that we should have a path of redemption for politicians who come forward and seek an apology. Is there a path of redemption for politicians who seek to come forward and explain, show remorse or explain their behavior in the past?
Absolutely. There should always be paths of redemptions, but it should be done before you get caught, not after you get caught.
Mm-hmm.
You want to ask me forgiveness, let's do it before you get caught and before you asking something of me. But once you get caught, don't say, well, forgive me and I want to stay in my position. No.
Okay. So you wouldn't support an amnesty program unless they're willing to give them 24 hours during Black History Month to come forward, confess, and then give them a path of healing. Is there something other than a confession or apology that we need? Do we need a commitment to public policy along the issues that the NAACP have embraced over the last century? Or are we just going to allow people to tell us today that they're sorry and go back to the same policies tomorrow?
The words fall short. The actions speak volumes. And the actions for us is public policy. And a democracy is all about the vote and the public policy that follow that interest. And for African Americans, I always talk about giving a good speech is a good thing, but then to get to that now what moment. Now that the speech is over, now what? Is the education system any better? Are there any more jobs in our community? Are we being provided with quality health care? It's the now what moment. So saying I'm sorry is fine. Now what? What's the public policy that's going to follow?
Are you willing to outline those steps so that politicians may know how to have a clear and credible way forward rather than waking up every morning to find new allegations and then new statements, and we see Derek Johnson back out in the media, back on Twitter, denouncing another politician.
You know, yeah, that's difficult. You know, how a month ago we would have never imagined that this was going to take place.
That's correct.
Yeah. So there's no way to prescript something you don't even know what you don't know.
Right. Right.
So we have to stay centered in a value system of respect, integrity, based in a public policy landscape that provide for the communities that represent.
Let me ask you about the first black woman and the first ever non-elected official to provide a rebuttal to the State of the Union. How would you grade Stacey Abrams' performance?
A plus.
And what message did she send, and what message did she instill in us or inspire in us after leaving the stage on Tuesday?
The level of clarity of voice, the value proposition that she put on the table, she displayed a level of care for the office of the president. He said, we want this president to succeed, but we want him to tell the truth too. That's a value proposition. I love the story of her father in the rain and how he understood the value proposition of someone who's out in the cold by themselves and someone who's going to the warmth of a family. Value propositions that this democracy should embrace. So for Stacey, she gets an A+. Now, she's a friend of mine for 25 plus years. She's a Mississippian.
Yes, she is.
One of the
Gulfport.
That's right. One of the smartest people that I know. She knows tax policy. She have lived experience she talk about. And I think her speech also exemplified a lesson she can demonstrate from her life experience. I was in a meeting with her, and someone asked a question about, do she support legalized marijuana? She said no. The crowd was upset. She said, hear me clearly. I have a brother that's addicted. And she go through the whole story about the pains of her brother. It was personal, it was real. You can't object to that. Now, you may say, from your frame, yeah, they should legalize it, but she's speaking through her experience. And her experience is real, it's the value proposition she brings to the table. And for that, I commend her, I support her, and I look for her to be the first U.S. Senator, African-American woman out of the state of Georgia.
All right. Well, I'll endorse that. I got to ask you about something that is taking place right now, and that is the appointment of William Barr to serve as Attorney General. What is the NAACP position on Mr. Barr?
We oppose William Barr. I spoke in the Senate hearing against William Barr. He was the Attorney General when the mass incarceration came into being. Perhaps one of the most destructive public policy outside of slavery for the African American community. I lived through the era of the crack epidemic. I am clear we didn't bring them drugs to our community. I am clear many of my friends were set up because those drugs were brought into our community. And I'm also clear some of my friends are still serving in jail as a result of drugs that they didn't bring in, drugs that they were set up by, and they're still serving in jail so certain corporations can make a profit. That's the legacy of William Barr. And for that reason alone, if nothing else, he should not be confirmed.
Okay. The NAACP is over 100 years old. You came on board at a time of tremendous challenge. What is the role of the NAACP in the 21st century?
NAACP is a membership-based advocacy organization. We have 2,200 units across the country in 47 states. We have members in Alaska, Hawaii, New Hampshire, Iowa, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Florida. We're the only organization structure where we have true legs on the ground, eyes and ears in almost every community. If we have a strong NAACP focused on our mission, and our mission is a proactive mission, improving the quality of lives of African Americans and a litany of stuff, with a reactive component, fighting against discrimination. Far too often we talk about the fighting against discrimination, we don't talk about the proactive mission. Far too often we fall into a traditional posture as opposed to recognize that we must evolve as an organization to increase voter participation, because in a democracy, our vote is our currency. And if NAACP can't do it in the black community, there's no other organization can. And in terms of the mass press, we can't allow the press to find the champions in our communities, nor should we allow the institutions of our community to die. We got to invest and reinvest and make it what it needs to be. NAACP will be as relevant as the people in this room make it.
So let me ask you about the Confederate statue and that campaign, as well as Take a Knee. During your tenure as president, you have tackled perhaps two of the most controversial issues, and now you're dealing with blackface. How do you go about making decisions as to what issues you take on, given the fact that every day we're dealing with some racial justice issue, whether it's in education, whether it's in the criminal justice system itself, whether it's environmental racism? How do you tackle these issues, and what's the process? What process do you use to identify these issues and then to tackle them at the state and national level?
So, because we are a bottom-up structure, where our units on the ground inform our policy direction, those units are able to collectively submit resolutions that we vote on at a convention annually. It's like a Baptist church. I'm a Baptist. Anybody in here Baptist? All right? If in fact you participated in the annual church meeting, you vote whether or not you keep the pastor or you let the pastor go. Right? It's led from the pews. NAACP is led from the membership. And that's what informs our policy direction. As I take on issues, most of those issues have already been pre-informed by members across this country. Our position against the Confederacy and Confederate symbols is consistent with our position with being opposed to slavery. Because the Confederacy represents a slave culture. It has nothing to do about heritage, it's about hate. And that hate is for African Americans and all those who work with us to prevent the southern sons of the South from exploiting us for cheap labor.
What is the role of black women in your organization today?
Key. I wouldn't sit in the seat if it would be black women. Many of our key leaders in the association are black women. Black women, just like the church, make up the backbone. Now, it's one of those scenarios where, well, why you haven't had a black woman president? Well, we've had 6 black women presidents. It wasn't until Mfume took this position that we consolidated the role of executive director and president and made it president and CEO. But why haven't you had a president and CEO? That's a good question. We need to do that.
What would you tell a 10-year-old girl or boy today? What would you tell them in terms of your own journey and why they should be a member of the NAACP? I'm referring to Rupert Richardson, who I heard when I was a young person.
Oh, the hat lady, yes.
Oh my God, she like Dorothy Height. What would you tell a 10-year-old? What would you tell a 20-year-old? What would you tell a student here at Howard University, or a student at any HBCU, or my alma mater, LSU? Why should they join and be a part of the NAACP today?
You know, it's funny. I have 5 kids, right? I know I don't look that young. I get it. So my 2 oldest are about 23-year-old and 19-year-old. One is in grad school. One is at a sophomore at Tougaloo. What I didn't say to them, I showed them is why it was the value proposition of being involved. So I didn't have to preach to them. I just I exposed them to what was taking place. And both of them got involved. My 17-year-old daughter, the same thing. She's constantly telling me how I don't understand how young people think. Well, why do you say that? Because you don't have an Instagram account. That's the frame, right? I do something. She said, well, nobody knows. Why? Because it wasn't in the shade room. So as she and I, we have these conversations, I am also planting seeds of responsibility throughout the conversation. And then I will hear back later from one of her friends or a teacher how she's going in class also. So she's considered the radical one. But it's about exposing. It's about having conversations. It's not about lecturing. It's about meeting people where they are and talking through scenarios, because I can learn a lot from my 17-year-old daughter. So now I have Instagram, and I'm trying to figure out how to keep up with the shade room at the same time. While she's always constant, why were you on this? What's going on in Virginia? We have those conversations.
I want to ask you about this post-racial. I was sitting here as I was listening to you. I was thinking back, 2019, Black History Month. 10 years ago, we were celebrating in 2009 the election of our first black president. And that was a celebration. We had Black History Month every month for 8 years. But now we're in the second year of President Trump's 4-year term. And yet we don't celebrate Black history. We don't talk about post-racial anymore. Why is that?
I think the reality that it is not post-racial. I'm going to deviate from the question, right? 'Cause I'm thinking about 2009 celebrating the first black president and recognize that there wouldn't have been the first black president if Jesse Jackson didn't run in 84 and 88.
That's correct. You can say that again. I don't think people understand
Right?
that.
There would not have been a first black president if Jesse Jackson had not run in 84 and 88.
Correct.
Right?
Who won Virginia in 1984?
Oh, Jesse.
Who won Virginia in 88?
It was Jesse run.
Okay.
Right? And the most important thing about both of those run, if you have not watched the 88 or 84 speech at the convention, you should watch it. Right? Because the message was, I grew up in Detroit, went to school in Mississippi. Right? Coleman Young was my idol. He was the mayor. And we had this thing that we heard Coleman Young was going to be on television. We rushed home because we knew he was going to cuss on TV that night. He was telling somebody off, right? And it was a beautiful thing for me to see a strong black male figure running a city like Detroit, clear about his positioning and his identity and focus on making the city of Detroit move forward. It was also clear to me in watching the campaigns of Jesse Jackson how inspirational that was, but what I later realized was the infrastructure that was built, the political infrastructure that was built. Donna was a part of the infrastructure. Regina was part of the infrastructure. A whole lot of people. And the legacy that was left behind was a black political machinery. That's a good thing. Come 2008, we celebrated the victory of President Obama, but some of that infrastructure was left behind. And because that infrastructure was left behind and ignored and discarded, we lost in 2010. We lost again in 2016. It's rebuilding time. Because you cannot keep a movement going based on an egocentric personality. It has to be a community-centric machine that keep it going from generation to generation.
So I want to add one thing to the post-racial moment in Jesse Jackson. That is Professor Ron Walters.
Yes.
The late had Ron Walters not helped us destroy and break down those rules so that we have proportional representation, we got rid of winner take all. And that's a legacy that Howard University should embrace, because Professor Walters was here at Howard University, School of Political Science, and he helped us construct those new rules. And because of Ron Walters' leadership, I'm still on the Rules Committee and many others, Mignon Moore, Leah Daughtry, and so forth. We are still protecting those rules that enable us to have candidates like Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, et cetera. All right.
And that's the beautiful thing about HBCU. If we leverage this experience correctly, we develop critical thinkers and understands that rules are fluid. They're not stagnant. And if it's working against you, you come up with a strategy to change the rules to benefit you. And that's what Ron Walters did.
An amazing man. If you haven't read about him, you should. I want to ask you 3 more questions and then open it up to the audience. Number 1 is the census. Where are we on this, the census, in terms of the back and forth, the lawsuit with the Department of Commerce. What's the status of that?
So we survived, challenged, and threw our case out. NAACP, we filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration for the deliberate attempt to undercount in the census, particularly in Prince George County. Prince George County has the highest per capita income of African Americans in the country. It is also the headquarters for the census. And consistently, they've had an undercount in Prince George County. Now, if you can't count folks in your backyard, you got a problem, right? This administration is intentionally trying to have an undercount, in our opinion, because it's about the taxes. If you undercount, then the allocation of federal resources becomes another a scenario where you can decrease the taxes of the top 1%. And understand, the game here is not about race. Race is the tool being used. The game is about money. Who gets taxed? Who's not taxed? And how those tax dollars are spent. The census determine the allocations, the federal allocations for the states based on the census count. So it's crucial that we pay attention, because at the end of the day, it controls the money flow in many of our communities.
Is it time for a 21st Century Voting Rights Act?
Oh, absolutely.
What would it look like?
It would look like, one, a compulsory voting, Australia style, or like 200 other countries where it's automatic. Because we vote, we happy if we get 65% of the voter turnout. In Australia, they talk about 96%. In Canada, they talk about 92%. In Germany, it's 93% of the population vote. Two, voting on a holiday on a Saturday. Why should we contain voting in a 12-hour day? And it should be multiple days, and you shouldn't contain it where people have to go to work. Three, the removal of restrictive voting precincts. Why should someone get off work, drive past 2, 3 precincts before they can cast their ballot? And then fourthly, why do we do voter registration? It's a vote suppression method. You shouldn't have to fill out an application to certify you a citizen so you cast a vote. That's a modern day Voting Rights Act. And with those things there, we knock out over 98% of all the vote suppression methods that take place.
Do you think it's possible to get that type of law through Congress, this Congress? Or do we need to focus on 2020?
I think we should always be laying the predicate, because we would never know the opportunity until it presents itself.
Okay. And I want to quickly shift to 2020. I know that NAACP is a nonpartisan organization, but you all are very engaged in voting, civic engagement and voter registration campaigns. What's your prediction for 2020 in terms of the political landscape? Are we going to see the same type of voter suppression tactics during the primaries? And do you have a position on what's happening in Texas now, the purging of hundreds of thousands of people, a state that barely went to the Republicans in 2018?
As it relates to Texas, we filed our lawsuit on Saturday evening. We officially filed. LULAC filed the lawsuit, so we're all challenging what's taking place in Texas. 2020, I predict it's going to be a crowded field.
Okay.
And it's going to be a hard fight. You know, elections are not fair games. And, you know, it kills me, you know. I used to help people get elected to office, election commissioners, and they get in there and say, we just want to be fair. I don't want to be fair. I want to be equitable and just. I want to make sure our folks get an opportunity to cast their ballot. And so because I know it's not a fair game, every trick you can think of will be pulled out, because at the end of the day, who gets elected determines the flow of billions of dollars. People don't run for office out of the kindness of their heart, and people don't write the checks for them to run just because they like the way they look. Yeah, it might be a popularity contest on the front end. It's a money game. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars on the table. And when that takes place, people seek advantages however they can get an advantage, whether it's legal or illegal. So yes, there'll be much going on in terms of vote suppression.
I noticed on the website, and again, I'm a member of the NAACP, there's a huge section on 28 ways to celebrate Black History Month. Mm-hmm. And when I saw that, I said, okay, it's time for me to read Maya Angelou, I Know What a Caged Bird Sang. Can you tell us some of the other ways in which we as members of the NAACP, as well as supporters of the NAACP, can strengthen and improve our celebration of Black History Month by following some of those ideas?
You know, I think the best way we can celebrate Black History Month is read about people you've never heard before, learn of their struggle. You know, Mary Bauer, who was a spy in Jefferson Davis' house, freed slave, learned to read, went to Liberia, worked there, came back, and she and a white woman, they conspired on how to get information out of his house. And when the opportunity presented itself, she presented as if she was an illiterate, just housemaid. And the whole time when they were talking about military strategy, she was in there gathering information, getting it to General Grant. Read about how we've always worked to liberate ourselves. Understand the legacy of this university and the contributions that you've given from the students who were engaged in SNCC, whether it's Charlie Cobb or Karen Spelman. Don't go to the usual, I have a dream. Understand why was there a dream and what was the real title of the speech and what was he talking about in the speech. Don't buy into the hype that we were a monolith in terms of the approach and there was a Messiah that came and saved us. No, learn about why Ella Baker stood up and did what she did on September Clark. Understand the power of Black women, but also understand that Bayard Rustin was an openly gay and communist strategist that created the way in which we sit here today. And A. Philip Randolph, in my opinion, was the most effective civil rights leader of them all. So for the next 28 days, don't go to the usual. Learn about who we are and how we got here as an African people in the diaspora, not just in the United States, because Nkrumah contributed much. Patricia Lumumba, Maurice Bishop. Go broader than the usual.
I forgot to ask you when we were talking about some of the issues, criminal justice reform. The First Step Act is a first step.
It is, that's all it is.
What's the next step?
You know, it's multi-tiered. Personally, I wish we could go up and round up all the guys who created the public policy and all the people who profit off of mass incarceration, because it was one of the biggest conspiracies to route people to jail that this country has ever seen. That's what I would like to see. Now, that's not going to happen, but we truly need to have a much more comprehensive reform package that help repair all of the men and women that were damaged as a result of the mass incarceration movement. We need to double down on how we create standards for both federal and state prisons, because the First Chance Act only addressed federal prisoners. Majority of the people incarcerated are in state jails, and if you ever go to Angola, Louisiana, it's bad. It's inhumane how they're treating brothers in that area.
Speaking of inhumane treatment, what is the NAACP doing, or are you working in coalition to help organizations who are trying to protect children and bring children who've been separated from their parents at the border? Are you working with any of the Hispanic organizations on those issues?
We have been. You know, even before we got there, we filed the DACA lawsuit. It wasn't a Latino group, it was the NAACP that successfully pushed the Trump administration back. We filed the lawsuit dealing with TPS because our members in New Orleans who are Haitian and our members in Miami who are Haitians, they were going to be impacted by TPS. So never allow anyone to create a false narrative that is us against them in the Latino community, because both DACA and TPS impact Africans in the diaspora. In the NAACP, we're not just an African-American organization. We're an organization that represents diaspora. We have an NGO with the United Nations. So we are global in terms of our focus.
That's great. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to open it up for questions. I know some of you would like to give us a real nice, long and winded Baptist speech, but I'm going to use some of my Catholic school training and keep it to just a question, a simple question. So identify yourself and ask Mr. Johnson your question. Yes, sir.
President Johnson, thank you so much, and Ms. Brazil, thank you so much. My question to you is, the Trump administration has made it clear that they're willing to weaponize human bodies to achieve their agenda. My question is, you know, outside of legal services, what is Black civil society, NAACP, Mark Morial's organization, National Urban League, what are they doing to meet some of the material needs of people? Because the Trump administration seems not to care any longer.
When you say weaponized human bodies, talking about the shutdown of government?
The shutdown, the children at the border, they seem to, once again, they don't care about if you don't eat, they don't care if you're locked up in a jail, on a cot. So what else is Black civil society doing?
So I would say in terms of shutdown, I predict, and I could be completely wrong, he's not going that route again. I don't think his party is going to let him go that route again, right? He will continue to do the things that he's doing. We will continue to find avenues to push back, whether it's through a lawsuit or through legislation. The best thing that happened last year was the turnover of Congress, because now we have CBC members who are chairing major committees that put the checks and balance in place to call some of the things he's doing into question.
We have a microphone right there in the middle. Next question. You can go to the mic right there in the middle.
That people of color should act in coalition under a shared sense of identity?
Yeah, I think the distraction is the conversation within itself. But at ACP, we start from the value proposition. And our value proposition is rooted in our mission, and then we operate from there. People call and say, why are you filing a lawsuit with DACA? That has nothing to do with us, that's them. I say, do you really understand what you're saying? Because there are tons of DACA recipients who are of African descent. In fact, one of my staff persons just got her citizenship in 2015, and she was here and she qualified for DACA, but for being able to get her citizenship. So we can't get caught up in the us against them, thinking the Latinos are the only immigrants that's here. No, there are a lot of brothers and sisters from the continent and from the Caribbean who are also here that we must represent, because if we don't, who else will?
Thank you for your question. Next question. Anyone?
Hello, my name is Maurice Green. I'm a freshman poli-sci major from Norfolk, Virginia. And my question is, NWCP has received criticism for being too bureaucratic and not dynamic enough, or be on the front of modern civil rights activism. So how would you, Mr. Johnson, respond to that criticism? Do you think the NWCP should take a more activist approach to its work, and how would, how will you try to increase the involvement in young people in the NWCP's activities?
The statement is a constructive criticism. It's true and false all at the same time. There's too much bureaucracy, and in some cases there's no bureaucracy. Sometimes we are absolutely agile and nimble to be where we need to be. Sometimes we take too long from analysis paralysis. That's the nature of an organization. That's the nature of longevity, and where there are safety measures in place so we don't stump our toe, sometimes those safety measures also prevent us from running when we need to. And so it's always that balance that you got to keep in mind. In terms of young people, well, I'm only 22 years old myself, so I support young people.
I'm 29 for the second time.
That's right.
Still a millennial.
That's right, right? But and that's the other thing. Let's not get caught up in ageism fights, us against us. The us and against us fight, we lose every time. Any successful movement is based on intergenerational models. The energy of our young people, the wisdom of our elders, and the influence and resources of the middle age. Tiffany Dina Lofton, I like calling her the middle name. Stand up, Tiffany Dina Lofton. That's our youth director there. And you talking about energy, she got energy. And I give her a long rope to do what she needs to do. And when she mess up, I say, don't do that again. Or I use some cuss words sometimes. And she start laughing like that, we keep it moving.
All right,
Great question, and thank you. And remember, the NAACP is open for you to join, to be a part of it, not just here on campus, but the DC branch. I was just down in Fort Worth, Texas, for Martin Luther King weekend, and it was a large turnout. Lorraine Miller.
Lorraine Miller.
It was fantastic. So please, if you are not a member, consider joining today. Next question. Yes, sir.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mr. President. My name is Salim Adolfo. I am actually the Criminal Justice Chair of the NAACP DC branch.
There you go.
Yeah,
And I would
thank
encourage
you.
everybody to come out to our next meeting, which is taking place February 21st at the Thurgood Marshall Center at 6:45 p.m. And we have food that we get from black vendors. But my question to you is, how can the national leadership encourage more participation in local level politics? Because I believe all politics is local, and when we can build strong movements at the ground level, I think that strengthens our capacity to have a larger impact at the national level. So I would just like to know, can we get some toolkits? Can we get some training or information on how we can get young folks to get involved, especially here in DC and in some populations where we have a lot of HBCUs into electoral politics?
Thank you. I'm going to give kudos to the DC branch. Young sister on the national board created a pipeline program called Next Gen. I mean, if you all want to get involved in an NACP, the DC branch is the place to be. It's walking distance from here. And trust me, if you walk in, she ain't going to push you out. She's going to give you something to do real fast. So I encourage you to get involved. In terms of toolkit, literally we are in a civic engagement retreat talking about that today, looking at, okay, how can we be more effective to provide support for our local units so they can get done what they need done. And so we are in the midst of talking about that today and tomorrow, particularly with the new technology, making sure you have metrics, make sure you have access to the database system, make sure you understand how to target. Those are the things we are working through now.
Next question. We have time for about 2 more questions. I want to make sure you get to your next appearance on time. Question?
Don't be scared.
I see a young lady on the right. Are you, yeah, you have a question?
No question, but I would certainly encourage everybody here to go to the website at aacp.org.
Would you get to the, so we can record that, ma'am?
Good evening, everybody. I don't have a question, but I would encourage everybody here to go to naacp.org, go to the membership section, and take out your membership today. If you can't do that, I want you to take out your cell phones and text NAACP to the number 40649. Thank you.
Where's the national convention this year?
Detroit, Michigan. It'll be our 110th convention. It is July 12th. 20th through the 24th. I knew that. I was testing you, DeJoy. I want to make sure you knew that.
And why Detroit?
You know, again, we bottom up. Our members come together. They get elected from their region on a committee called Time and Place. They take in submissions from different cities, and then they vote on the location, our members. But, you know, it's the chocolate city. Why not Detroit?
Motor City.
That's right, Motor City.
This is Chocolate City.
It ain't, look at it ain't that chocolate no more.
No, there's a ripple effect taking place, but it is still chocolate in
Caramel.
many places. Caramel, yeah, mocha choco, whatever you want to call latte. Any last question? Yes, could you go to the microphone, please, sir? That's a good one.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Chavis, and I'm a 2-time graduate of Howard University. I went here for undergrad and for law school. And my question is about the 2020 election. I was very inspired by the fact that Kamala Harris jumped in the race, Cory Booker as well. But it seemed like as soon as Kamala jumped in, most of the critiques came from our community about her background as a prosecutor and critiquing some of the laws she had to enforce. So my question is, how do we I mean, I think anyone running for president needs to be criticized. We need to know what their views are on the issues important to our community. But how do we effectively get people to not bring their hardest critiques for our own? Because I think it would be transformative to have someone like her in the White House, not only for Howard University, but for the community. It would be uplifting. So I just wanted to know what you thought about ways to effectively convince people to keep an open mind, or if not support her, at least not tear her down so quickly?
Kamala she's tough. Critiques is not going to run her away. She comes from the Willie Brown School of Politics, right? That's important. Also, tough critiques early could be a good thing, because if you can weather the storm, you're stronger when the real storm hits you. Because right now, it's a little thunderstorm, it ain't that much, but a tidal wave is going to hit you if you become a nominee. And so you need to be prepared. So it's only going to make all of the nominees, particularly her and Corey, stronger by dealing with stuff now. It prepares them for later.
Okay, thank you.
And remember, the race for the 2020 Democratic nomination, as well as the race for the 2020 Republican nomination. I'm a Democrat, but I know a little bit about the policies and the practice on the Republican side. It is a race for delegates. So while we're now focused on who's in or who might jump in or who might not come in, it's a race for delegates. And for those of you who not only live here, you go to school at Howard University, you all need to think about running for delegate to the 2020 Democratic Convention. If you want to help one of these candidates, if you care about their public policy position, if you care about the future of our country, it's up to you to decide now if you're going to run. You can run back home. You can run in the District of Columbia if you're registered here. The bottom line is, do not wait until February of 2020. You should make up your mind now. Thank you. Last question.
Good evening. My name is Jameson Davids. I'm a senior political science major here at Howard University. I'm from the census backyard, Prince George's County. And my question is, in a political climate of compromise right now, do you believe that we should now move to the next step of simply going from prison reform to now reimagining a society where prisons are no longer needed, and maybe what people call the radical sense of start advocating for prison abolitionment instead?
Yes. I like the statement. That
I
wasn't
love the
question.
statement.
It was
Yeah.
smooth, yes.
Yeah, it was
No,
good.
no.
He was a political
That was
science major. We
smooth.
may have to run him for office,
That's
Derek.
right.
I love that. That's great. Well, I want to end by talking about HBCUs. As a proud graduate of LSU, I was a strong and ardent supporter of HBCUs. Southern University in Baton Rouge, I wrote columns. I was a reporter on campus, and I wrote columns for the Daily Reveille. And I took to the newspaper to really fight for HBCUs. Southern University in particular, where my mother went, Grambling, where my father attended. How do we preserve and strengthen and bring HBCUs into this so-called mainstream of higher education, where philanthropy and other resources are devoted to colleges like this, where, you talked about the history of so many people who attended. Just being on this campus for the last 6 months, I can't stop reading.
Right. Howard is one of the schools with such a rich history. The power of Howard sits in the federal government. The policy makers who make the decision about your appropriation, they get elected from where you come from. So it's that kind of schizophrenic type of reality. You want to be engaged on campus, but the power is going to come from senators and representatives outside of D.C. because D.C. still is lacking statehood. And so in this colony, because you have no voice, much of the decisions are going to be made from U.S. senators and congresspersons in Prince George County and in North Carolina and all over the country. So we got to figure out how to keep you engaged here, but at the same time, make sure that the platform that individuals run on include supporting HBCUs, but especially Howard, because unlike other state-supported schools, it's a local fight. But here, your money is federal. And then for my school, which is a private institution, it's even a bigger boulder to roll uphill. But we have to fight to preserve and protect. And when I'm talking to students, it's almost like a fight. You got to go to HBCU. You got to go to black school. I am clear from me and my development, I needed to get to an HBCU. And I went to law school, majority, but it was important. And so as you talk to your younger siblings and younger people, encourage them to go to HBCU because some schools are simply tuition driven. If they get there, that's support of the school.
I want to thank you for that response. And President Johnson, I want to thank you for coming to Howard University today to be a part of the King Lecture Series, also for your advocacy, your leadership, and your commitment. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, out of the 28 days that you will celebrate Black History Month, are you going to read a book? Are you going to go to a Black movie or a Black film? What will you personally do to continue Black history?
I'm going to go see Raising in the Sun next Thursday on Broadway. I want to take my daughter to go see Hamilton. It ain't got nothing to do with Black history, but it has everything to do with Black history because my 11-year-old daughter loves her some Hamilton. She can repeat all of the words to the show. And so to ensure that we have a future Black history, I'm going to invest in her opportunity to learn.
When I finish reading Maya Angelou book, I intend to make another donation to a HBCU because that is part of my legacy to help educate the next generation. But I also want you to know that this month I am going to renew my 2019 dues early.
Thank you.
All right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you, Derek Johnson. Thank you, the NAACP. Ladies and gentlemen, we have some